Here to discuss Netflix's A House of Dynamite, please welcome director Kathryn Bigelow, screenwriter Noah Oppenheim, actor Tracy Letts, and Atlantic staff writer Tom Nichols. Here to lead the conversation is the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Thank you.
Oh, you follow me? You come around here.
All right.
Oh, never follow me. There you go.
Thank you all. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to Netflix for helping us do this. Tom, Tracy, Noah, Kathryn. I've memorized all their names. I want to, Kathryn, let's start with you. That was a teaser, not even a trailer. That
Correct.
was a teaser of a trailer. I don't want to give away anything, although it's already premiered, to acclaim in Venice. But tell me what motivated you to take on the subject, probably the most serious subject one could take on, the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Well, probably because it's the most serious subject one can take on. But no, I grew up at a time when I was asked to hide under a desk periodically in school, and not really sure why I was doing that, or what good that would serve. And I've been fascinated ever since. Obviously, there were a lot of movies back then, certainly in the 60s, like Strangelove, Failsafe, On the Beach. But there hasn't been any dialogue or references to the nuclear problem really since then. It seems like it's kind of become normalized. And so I thought that maybe now is the time to shed a little light on it, because it feels very critical, and certainly that we live in a volatile world. Hence, living in a House of Dynamite. When you see the movie, you'll understand the title, hopefully. And so I decided to make a film just about that.
Did you, when you now have made a trifecta of national security films,
Right.
Hurt Locker, Zero Dark 30, and now this. Was this part of a plan, or did this come naturally? Did this evolve from those in some way?
It pretty much evolved. Each one evolved from the other, like Hurt Locker into Zero Dark into House. But yeah, national security is, for whatever reason, a fascination of mine. I think probably because I feel, again, we live in vulnerable time. And I'm curious, you know, how safe we are globally.
Tom, how safe are we globally? No, I'm kidding. You don't have to do that. It's too late in the day to try to do that one. But Tom, talk a little bit about your relationship to this. Tom Nichols is, a great Atlantic writer. Before he was a great Atlantic writer, he was a mediocre Atlantic writer. Then he got better. No, before he was a great Atlantic writer, he was a professor for many years at the Naval War College, and is one of the country's leading experts on the Soviet Union and Soviet and then Russian nuclear capabilities. So you got involved in this early. I want you to talk a little bit about that, and also give us, without giving away too much of the film, give us your own review of the film. You don't have to hold back, because I freely will say that I loved it. I thought it was the best movie about nuclear war that I've ever seen. So you go.
Wow.
When I came to see it, and Kathryn invited me to come to the set and then see the early screening, I said to her at the time, I expected to have a punch list. I'm an expert on this stuff, and I said, well, I'm sure it's. I didn't. I was shaken. It shook me up, and I came to realize that I was kind of going, 30 minutes at a time without exhaling, because it's not really the day after, or what I sometimes call nuclear porn. Cities, blocks blowing up, and all of that stuff. It's just it's the problem that people who study nuclear weapons worry about, which is what happens when perfectly good, rational, normal people get into a situation with something that is rationally incomprehensible, and they have 20 minutes to figure it out, not just to make a decision. They have 20 minutes to figure out what's going on, to talk to each other, to think about alternatives, to make a decision. That, the people who study nuclear war never really thought about World War II as the model. They think about World War I, where nobody wants this, nobody understands why it's happening, nobody can figure out how to make it stop. And I think the movie captured that perfectly. Because and I saw it again as it progressed, and it bothered me even more the second time around. Because it's almost like you watch this happen, and there is just an inexorability to it that I think scares me about this situation in general, about the nuclear situation. And I'm glad. I'm a fan of the movie too, and I'm glad Kathryn made it, because it bothers me that we don't think about this anymore. That it's just after the 1990s, it just sort of fell off the end of the table, and people say, well, okay, solved. We've gotten past that one, and that's crazy. I mean, in some ways we're in more danger now than we've ever been.
Noah, you wrote the movie. You're an ex-journalist, recovering journalist.
I am.
I don't know.
Non-practicing journalist.
Non-practicing journalist. To me, the scariest single line or single moment in this film, and I think I can give away this much, there's obviously an attempt to stop what's happening from happening, and a American missile officer, after the attempt fails, basically says, we did everything right. And that's what's so interesting about this, is that everybody, up until including the President of the United States, does what they're supposed to do in a, given the pressure, conscientious way. That seems to be the message of the movie. Tell me I'm wrong, but that seems to be the message of the movie, that this is actually not doable. You can't make decisions in a nuclear escalatory cycle in the time allotted by reality.
It's certainly one of the points of the movie. We have, over the course of the past several decades, built these very complicated systems. We have drilled on these very regimented procedures that says, if this, then that, then take this step. If A, then B. If C, then D. And the reality of it is, it's all at its core fundamentally irrational, because it all leads to one destination, which is the end of human life on Earth, on civilization. Yeah. And so once that first domino falls and everyone starts going through those checklists, following those procedures, the ability to kind of find an off-ramp and de-escalate is, almost impossible to find. It has a momentum to it that is terrifying.
Right. One of the remarkable aspects of this film, and again, I come from the national security reporting side of this. I've done that for more years than I could count now. Tom and I have talked about this a lot. When we watch these movies, TV shows, within 5 minutes, it's like, oh, that would never happen. That's completely improbable. That's idiotic. That's there is one of the many qualities of a Bigelow movie about national security, is that it's a high degree of credibility, even people who know what's going on. One of the most remarkable things is Tracy, and your performance. You play the head of Stratcom, the 4-star general in charge of the Strategic Command of the United States, in charge of the Global Nuclear Strike Command, our nuclear weapons, our nuclear arsenal. Tom and I both spoke about this after I saw it for the first time in a screening. I said, I've met 50 4-star generals who remind me exactly of your portrayal of it. Can you talk about how what you were trying to capture in that very important character, and how you sort of inhabited that? I don't know what you would call it, Tom. Like, there's a kind of breeziness, and I've got this kind of quality. There's an insouciance, and then there's a kind of, well, it's not my fault that this is happening at the same time. But can you talk a little bit about how you came to understand the nature of that kind of person who would have that sort of job?
Most of it is on the page. It's a really well-written script. It's very detailed, very detailed. I couldn't make heads or tails out of it the first time I read it. Certainly that military speak and the acronyms and all that stuff was just, it's gibberish to me. So I read it a couple of times. It's very detailed, but it's all on the page. And again, you know, it's a procedural. We're seeing people do their jobs. And obviously in that world, so much of it is about the hierarchy and just passing information up the line. I had a couple of guys on the set with me. I can't claim I did a lot of research before. I'm not big on that. Like I say, a lot of it was on the page anyway. But I had a couple of guys on the set with me who have sat in that seat, and they were an invaluable resource. And, you know, one of the things they communicated to me early on is, well, you're really not answerable to anybody you're in a scene with. I mean, you're answerable to the president, but other than that, you get to do this however you want to do it. You want to drink a coffee? Drink a coffee. You want to stand up, sit down, salute, don't salute, do whatever you want. You're in charge. So obviously there's great freedom and a kind of ease in that. It seemed to me that the job for a lot of us playing the roles in the thing, though so much of it on the page is just about procedure, is about just finding those little moments of humanity, little moments where some recognizable human behavior might kind of seep out. And so the audience could see that and recognize, oh, that's a human performing that function, right? There's a human being up there wearing that uniform, wearing that suit, making those calls. There's a human being behind it. Which is, I think, one of the really beautiful things about the film, and in some ways the terrifying thing about the film too, right? There's always human beings making these decisions, and maybe they had a bad day, and maybe they've had too much sugar. I mean, maybe, you know, maybe they might have any number of things going on. The guys who I had as consultants there.
These are technical advisors,
Yes.
people who've done the jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Generals.
And they were impressive guys. I mean, they're very sober fellows. They take their job very seriously.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and then Kathryn creates a great environment in which you can do your work. And so, in other words, plus I got the set, I got the uniform. It's like I don't have to do a lot. It's all kind of there.
Once you put the uniform on, it kind of does the acting a little bit.
Some ways. A good haircut goes a long way.
That's what Stevie Van Zandt once told me about Silvio Dante. He said, I didn't know that you were such a good actor. He said, the wig did 90% of the acting. It really I'd never forget that. Kathryn, a key decision, and this is for Noah too, a key decision you made was to create a character of the president, the one person in our system, and we'll talk about that with Tom in a minute, the one person, the nuclear monarch of the United States. We have a democratic elected president who is an absolute monarch in one area alone, which happens to be the most important area. But you made him a competent, thoughtful person. That's a large decision because it's not something that we can always count on in this country. And Tom knows this story. There's a famous incident in the early 70s of a missile officer, an Air Force missile officer named Harold Herring, who was in a training session. And our system is very, very elaborate. There's a book for everything. There's a guide for everything. But Harold Herring, who was then a major and an actual missile officer in a silo, in a command center, raised his hand and said, all this is great, but what if the president is crazy? And he was actually removed from the Air Force because that's not the question. You can't ask that question. Mm-hmm. Everything is predicated on the national command authority rests in one person who's democratically elected by the people, and he gets or she gets to choose what to do. So talk about the decision to make this not a Strange Lovian kind of film, but saying, no, even with this very competent guy, here are the challenges?
Well, I mean, we talked a lot about it and felt that we wanted it to be as credible and authentic as possible, given that it's a hypothetical and a hypothetical scenario, and kind of let the audience into the room of an area and a world and a decision-making process that you don't normally see. And for me, what was so surprising is the fact that the president has sole authority and has to make a decision within minutes of such utter and complete complexity that, I mean, anybody's head would spin. But again, we kind of went back to what was a hypothetical that we wanted to see. You know, it was.
And also, what is the danger that we're trying to shine a light on, right?
Yeah.
If the person making that decision is a mad buffoon, it gives the world and the audience an easy excuse. Well, we don't have to worry about nuclear weapons or our
Right.
nuclear system
Right.
because hopefully we won't have a mad buffoon, God forbid,
Right.
as the president. But if we see a rational, thoughtful person
Right.
trapped in this system and it still is sort of
Yeah.
railroading him towards disaster, hopefully that...
Even more terrifying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'll push back a little bit, Noah, and say that having a mad buffoon is not a theoretical challenge facing. No. I'm going to be very blunt here. I mean, it's because it's not a secret. I've written repeatedly in the last 10 years about Donald Trump and my judgment that he is not equipped to hold national command authority over a nuclear arsenal. And it's just self-evident to me. I mean, there's a separate question, which is any human being
Right.
capable of making a set of decisions in 18 minutes from zero, not having a crisis, in 18 minutes that could lead to the destruction of the planet. But it's not a theoretical challenge when you have somebody who's not cognitively capable or emotionally capable of making decisions in this way, to highlight the fact that we're electing somebody to do that. I mean, that's what I'm pushing back on. Like
Sure,
it wouldn't have been outlandish for you to make a movie about an incompetent person having that authority.
Right, but then it becomes about that. Whereas in this case, what I think we're trying to say is your other question, which is, should any one human being hold the fate of all civilization in their hand and be forced to make a decision within minutes? And one of the things that we found out in our research was talking to former government officials, and we asked a guy who held very senior roles at the CIA and the Pentagon, and we said, what kind of briefings does the Secretary of Defense get or the President of the United States get when they first take office? These are civilians often who've never held a position in the military, who've never contemplated these scenarios before, and they have all the authority. And how much practice do they do? And the answer was almost none.
None. It was shocking to me.
Why is that?
Well, in the case of this one gentleman we spoke to, he just was too preoccupied with everything else, like hostage negotiations and on and on and on. And so that's not necessarily carved out of their day as a prerequisite. I mean, that was sort of we were both quite surprised that was the case.
Tom, is there any way that a competent president could make decisions in the time frame? And if not, what are alternative command structures that might save the planet?
I don't.
Just a simple question.
Thank you all for coming.
And we have 30 seconds.
First of all, no, because it's not something human beings can rationally comprehend. That the options they're being given are so cataclysmic, that it's literally impossible to get your mind around it. And even people who work on this stuff, I mean, I can remember the first time I was in a meeting I was doing work on defense stuff, and somebody said, well, in this scenario, we only lose 40 million people. And, as if that's just a normal discussion about 40 million people. And so no president, by the way, I just wanted when you guys were talking about Trump, you don't have to go to Trump. remember that when Richard Nixon was in his final days, he was drinking heavily, wasn't sleeping, people were worried about him, and the Secretary of Defense sent out a message saying, to commanders saying, if you get any unusual orders, check them with me. Now that is illegal, it's unconstitutional, he's not supposed to have done that.
Who sent that out? The Secretary of Defense?
Schlesinger, Jim Schlesinger. But no single human being in the amount of time involved can make a decision to kill millions of people, even for reasons that they may think, retaliation or saving the world or whatever it is. And I think one thing that Kathryn and Noah really captured in this movie is that the system is created to enable the president to do things. It's to push the president towards doing something. It's not there to make him slow down or think or deliberate or meet with anybody. The whole system is a Cold War system that's predicated on a surprise attack against the United States, where the president, in about 7 or 8 minutes, has to make a decision about whether to retaliate and destroy the attacker. And that they're really, now the military will now say, well, we've built in other options. We're trying to put in more options for the president. But the system is designed to enable the president to act quickly and alone. And I think people sometimes don't get that, because I get asked about this, when we did the nuclear issue, in the Atlantic. People say, well, who does the president have to get approval from? Or who can stop this? Or who's the other vote on that? And it's like, you don't get it. It's not designed that way. It's designed so that when someone comes in and says, Mr. President, we are under attack, he says, execute major attack option 7, and he gets in a helicopter and he tries to get as far away from Washington as possible. And that's it.
That's it, yeah.
But stay on this for a minute. How would you, you can't ask, how would you change the system without understanding how the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans, for that matter, make their own nuclear decisions? But I mean, given what you know about those decision chains, how would you change the American decision chain? This is where I go from having been a pretty hard right Cold Warrior in my misspent youth to kind of the dove that I am now. Paul Nitze, the famous arms negotiator and Reagan advisor, at the end of his life told one of his friends, he said he told Ronald Reagan, never retaliate, even if we were attacked first. There's just no point in killing 200 million people in Russia. And I think one thing we could do we could try to get out of this kind of doomsday Rube Goldberg machine that gets, this domino effect that gets started, and say we have an official policy of no first use of nuclear weapons. We are going to keep a very small arsenal of 300-400 strategic weapons that are only there for the existential defense of the United States, that we don't believe nuclear weapons have, battlefield uses. Stop training and drilling for that, because in the end, I think most presidents are going to say, as we did during the Gulf War and other, Cuba and other places, most presidents, when they've been presented with this, say, just close that, we're not even going to think about it, we're not doing it. And so I think, unspooling this Cold War machinery that we've left in place. I mean, we're about to spend, $1 trillion over about 30 years to modernize our nuclear arsenal. And we're just going to create the same nuclear arsenal, only it's nicer and shinier. If we don't spend it, then our nuclear arsenal slowly decays, and Russia has a better nuclear arsenal, and China has a better nuclear arsenal. So how do you deal with that? A
nuclear missile is a pretty simple piece of, I hate to say it this way, but nuclear weapons were invented when radios still had tubes in them, and airplanes still had propellers. You can have a robust and reliable nuclear deterrent without, creating the B-21 stealth fighter and, a new generation of submarine launched missiles. Yes, the Minutemen have to be replaced because they get old and they rot and they fade away. But there's no reason to make newer, better, bigger, because we know the design. We know how it works. It's not a complicated equation to solve in that sense. And we do it because, and I think, because we can.
Tracy, I'm interested in something. You're newer to this subject than Tom, certainly, and Noah and Kathryn have been thinking about this for a long time. I'm asking you as a citizen of the United States, not as an actor. You're exposed to this subject while making this. What was the most surprising aspect of the American nuclear posture to you? What was the most surprising aspect of this very large subject?
I suppose the most surprising is just there are very few things that happen in this movie that don't happen. There are only 3 or 4 things that happen in this movie, in this kind of domino chain, that don't happen on a daily basis. In other words, we're not, the movie's just not that far removed from reality.
Could you just give a couple of examples of what you mean by that so people can orient
Well,
themselves a
let's
little
start
bit?
with somebody firing a nuclear weapon at us would be the first one. It hasn't happened, but it could happen. Why wouldn't it happen, ultimately? I mean, you have to ask yourself that question. Why wouldn't somebody do that? Product for use, right? You remember that phrase? Product for use. Why do you build a nuclear weapon? Unless you're going to shoot a nuclear weapon. Why do you own a gun? Unless you're going to shoot a gun. You know, so that's the first thing. But then there are only a couple of places where the system has to break down a little bit or get compromised a little bit, maybe by bad actors, before you find yourself in this scenario that we're in. And you know, these, again, the technical advisors kept telling me, it's like, this has all been gamed out. Nobody's making any decisions here. This has all been gamed out. You're just pushing information up the line. That's all your responsibility is. And those hierarchical structures are sacrosanct. And so what happens is that the lower level people in the military pass the information up, and it just keeps going up, 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 up until it reaches the president. And there's the decision. That's the only decision in the whole, there's a big book, but it's basically boils down to one very scary decision. So we had a good time making the movie, but we were all aware that we were engaged in a kind of terrifying exercise. Yeah. The movie's, you know, I think the tagline for the movie should be, "You will not sleep."
Yeah, no. This is definitely a movie that you shouldn't watch right before you go to bed. That and Uncut Gems. It's actually more tension-filled than Uncut Gems, which is basically the movie one should not watch before you go to sleep. Hurt Locker is also in that category. I did that the other night. I started watching Hurt Locker at 11:30 p.m.
That's not a good idea.
That was not smart. Kathryn, talk about how you made everything so real. And what I mean, Tracy reminds me that Stratcom, the big board, everything is, the White House, even the Secretary of Defense's office is foot for foot exactly the way it looks. How do you pull that off, and why do you pull that off? Most of the audience won't know or care.
Yeah, I feel like it's my responsibility to make it as authentic as possible, but I had an extraordinary production designer, Jeremy Hindle, and we spent time at Stratcom. He spent time in all of these places, like the White House Situation Room. And so making it as realistic as possible was, also very, very important for Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. These are stories that are embedded in history. And even though it's a contemporary history, but it has to be real. I think that's my responsibility.
You said something in passing that I think people noticed, which is you spent time in Stratcom. Why does Stratcom in Omaha, 7 stories under the ground, on Offutt Air Force Base, why does Stratcom let you in? How do you convince them? I mean, these are top secret American facilities. How does that happen?
Well, good question. We were fortunate enough to have our technical advisors, as Tracy spoke about. There's a gentleman named Doug Lute who is very familiar and had spent time in Stratcom. We let him read the script. He read the script. He thought it was very important that we actually visit the facility because so much of it takes place there. And that was incredible. We couldn't photograph anything in the room, but myself and the production designer, Jeremy was looking everywhere. And it was just meticulous how he recreated it.
Right.
They walked on the set and looked around and said, "Oh my,
I know.
this is our office. This is where we work."
Right.
I would add the reason why is because Kathryn has earned that enormous respect from the military for the work that she's done.
Right. That's an interesting thing because no one can look. Zero Dark 30 deals with some unpleasant aspects of the war on terror. Hurt Locker deals with some very unpleasant aspects of the Iraq War. Why does this is not? I don't think necessarily Pete Hegseth would appreciate your films because they are complicated. It's the end of the day. I'm tired. I'm just gonna. I don't care. I don't really care. No, it's true. I mean, there's a brittleness to their approach to information, which is like either you're 100% on our side or you're an enemy.
Right.
So I come back to this. Why do, let's say, smart people in the military, high-ranking officers, appreciate films that have very, very negative aspects to them? I mean, here you are in this film questioning American nuclear doctrine, for instance.
True. All I can say is that I think the authenticity, and I mean, there's a kind of respect paid in that desire for authenticity, and I think that's what's conveyed. At least I hope. But you know, they seem to like it, so I'm not going to argue with them.
Right. Right.
I never heard those guys. I never heard one iota of politics from those guys.
Yeah.
Right.
In the same way that this movie, I don't think the word Democrat or Republican
Right.
is spoken in the film.
Right.
Right. It was just not on the table for our discussion.
Right. And let me end there with Kathryn and Noah on that question. One of the biggest decisions you made was to not have this be partisan.
Right.
You can't tell anything about anyone's politics. Talk about that. I mean, there's so many decisions you made along the way to make this credible. Talk about that decision in light of this polarization that we have now.
I would say because fundamentally the nuclear issue is not and should not be a partisan issue.
Yeah.
It's a threat to humanity. It's not even an American issue. It's a global issue. And you know, no matter who's in office, which party has control of the reins of government in this country and in one of the other 9 nuclear powers, it's all of us who are living under the gun and all of us who have to confront this challenge.
Yeah, I think it just transcends politics. I mean, you're talking about the annihilation of civilization. I mean, there's no politics there.
Tom, do you agree with that? There's no politics there?
I think one of the things that's really remarkable is if you look at every president and his reaction after getting his nuclear brief, Kennedy, Reagan, Carter, whoever it is, they all have had the same reaction after getting their brief. They're horrified. They're horrified, they're freaked out. They immediately say, how do we not do this? Nixon got his briefing, ordered a total review of the nuclear structure. Reagan avoided his because he said it's too crazy to even think about. Kennedy walked out and said, his comment was he turned to one of his aides and he said, and we call ourselves the human race. And I think that shows just how much this transcends politics.
Yeah.
That presidents from left to right, Democrat, Republican, get this briefing, they're shown what would happen, and they walk out and they say, we can't have it. This can't happen.
Yeah.
Tom, you've hit on maybe the most important point, or the most important question. Why are the people who run for president and then win so surprised by all of this? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why anybody would want to run for president, knowing that that power would be the prize. But why do we have a system in which people don't know enough? Even the people who are
they don't think about it. I mean, if you're running for president, you say, okay, you know, I was a state legislator, I was a governor. You know, I didn't get asked a lot about whether I approve of launch on warning or launch under attack when I was, you know, in the State House in Austin. And then they get there, and you know that becomes part of the job. One of my favorite anecdotes is after the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy calls Nixon because in a weird way, they're friends. And he literally, after all this, and he says, it's really true. All this national security, foreign policy, this really is the most important job a president has, isn't it? And then he says, who gives a shit if the minimum wage is $1.20 or $1.30 compared with something like this? And they don't get that until somebody sits them down and says, right. Here's what it's going to look like when we walk in with this 40-pound briefcase and say, Mr. President, a bad thing happened and now you have to make a decision.
Right. Kathryn, let me end with you. Are you going to be able to show this film and talk about it with national leadership? Are you trying? Is there receptiveness in Washington so far, in the White House and Congress, to bringing this? It seems like an incredibly important message to bring.
I certainly hope there's a receptiveness. Yes.
Are you gonna, if the White House said, "Please come screen this for us," would you do it?
I think we would. Of course, we would.
Yeah.
What do you want people to take away from this film?
I think it's just awareness. And maybe obviously, a high-end goal would be reducing the nuclear stockpile, but having a real awareness of something that has become normalized and is unthinkable. We don't think about it. We don't talk about it. Yes, my generation, but there's generations that know nothing, don't know about this at all, and that's the important thing. It's just to raise awareness and realize we're kind of, as I said, we're living in a house of dynamite. And how do we remove the dynamite from the walls?
I highly recommend this film. It'll be on Netflix October
24th.
October 24. It really is one of the most powerful films about any issue I've ever seen, especially on the nuclear front. And congratulations to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.